WisconsinEye is at the Slinger Public Library. We're interviewing candidates in the December 19th primary, the Republican primary in the 58th Assembly District. Steve Stanek of West Bend is one of those candidates. Mr. Stanek, welcome to WisconsinEye.
Thank you for having me today.
How long have you lived in the 58th District? Tell me about it, its greatest need, and how would you help the district meet that need?
I have been in the district basically since 1994. My wife and I have lived in an apartment actually in Milwaukee for a short time and then came back to the district when we decided to raise a family, and have been here ever since then. It's been a great place for our kids to grow up. So,
greatest need of the 58th?
The 58th needs to continue its strong leadership. I think that's the biggest thing that they have. If you look at the history of the 58th District, they've always had very strong leadership and they've always performed well in Madison. So I think that's the biggest need, is to continue that legacy that comes from our strong conservative roots here in the 58th.
Have you held any elective office before? First campaign?
I have not. I've worked on some campaigns as volunteer staff. I did some work with the city of West Bend they had a board that helped out with different fiscal issues. So the task force that I worked on was called the Value Task Force. And that's really where I started to change my interest in politics, was there, and then on the other campaigns that I worked on. So that's how I ended up here today.
After the unfortunate death of Representative Gannon, what issues have drawn you into this race? Excuse me.
The biggest thing was the lack of prominent people that potentially started to opening in this race. There are some connected people in West Bend, and I talked with many of them to see if they were interested in running. Every person I talked to, Pat Strakota, Craig Sedonico, who's the mayor in town, was another potential candidate, I thought. And they all said, well, no, it doesn't either work with my family or I'm not interested. And they all said, well, why don't you run? So we sat down and looked at it. I've been very involved in the community. Always interested in politics, and it fits in my schedule and where I'm at with my family, and that's why I'm here today.
You're not an elected official, so what's the nature of your business?
So I do hazardous waste consulting, so primarily transportation and disposal is the biggest issues that I have. So I'm a broker of those services, and I handle nationwide spill response for type of environmental issues.
Hazardous waste has to be transported, which gets us into the transportation funding issue.
Absolutely.
It delayed the passage of the state budget. We have no long-term resolution on how to pay for highways 10, 5, even 15 years out.
Correct.
How would you solve that problem?
I think the biggest thing is looking at the system that we have in place and making it a more responsible bidding system. I think we collect enough revenue the way it is. I just think we have to spend our money more efficiently. Working in the business arena, I think there's always places that we can cut, and looking at newer technologies and new bidding processes to change some of that. That being said, we probably still are going to have to continue to find sources of funding, but just as long as we don't borrow to continue to build our roads, I think that's probably the most important thing moving forward.
Are you absolutely opposed to either raising the gas tax or the registration fee, and how do you feel about tolling?
Definitely the taxing portion. I don't think that we should generate it that way. I don't know enough about the tolling research that's been done. It's a fairly new concept. I think you'd have to open it up and see. I just don't have enough information to really make a determination right now.
How would you have voted on the $3 billion with the B incentives to the Foxconn development in Racine County?
Yeah. It's unfortunate that this is the state that our country is in, but incentives are the way that you draw businesses to our area. I think the Foxconn, with the CEO backing it up with a $500 million guarantee, I think that allows us to have some safeguards, and I think it'll benefit our state greatly and our region greatly. We've already had talks with local economic development people here in Washington County, where suppliers to Foxconn may potentially relocate, so they're looking at business parks and things in the area. So I see it as a positive, and I would definitely have supported it.
Local businesses are already talking about potentially being suppliers to Foxconn?
No, I think that you have to be prepared when suppliers locate here, one, how it affects your labor force, and to have the resources and the infrastructure ready when those businesses come looking for a business park or infrastructure to support Foxconn. So that's the discussions that a lot of those places are having.
Lawmakers in this area are deeply involved. The senator and
Dewey Strobel?
Yes, and
Rob Brooks.
Brooks. Very involved in the dark store controversy. There's both have introduced bills that would say basically judges cannot lower the assessed value of dark or closed major retailers. How do you feel about either of those bills?
I think that I would support some of those bills when you look at them and make sure you have the proper incentives or ability to allow the retailers to also have some say in that application of the tax. We have to be very careful. Small businesses drive our economy here in Wisconsin, and we can't overtax them in the process, but it's also not fair to go untaxed. So I think that there's a fine line when you look at those proposed legislations of how those assessments are made and determine it from there.
Now, you operate a small business.
Correct, yes.
What's the greatest need of Wisconsin small businesses going beyond your own specific
I think
circumstances?
trained labor would probably be the most important thing. I think we have to look at the education system and how we prepare our future graduates, high school graduates, and make sure they choose the right path of whether it's college or some other type of education to improve our workforce is probably the biggest thing. As they talk about Foxconn and what that's going to do to the labor force, I think we have to educate our kids and give them the proper education to stay in Wisconsin and make it the great state that it is.
A follow-up question. Is your own business having trouble finding people because of this
Typically not.
employment problem?
My business is kind of a sales staff, and as I said, we broker our services.
Oh, I see.
So it's not heavily staff-oriented. I'm more with subcontractors. Now, my subcontractors, I use a lot of transportation companies. They are having those issues, absolutely, trying to find qualified people going forward.
They can't find qualified people with CLDs, commercial drivers?
CDLs.
CDLs,
Yep,
excuse me.
yes.
They can't find them.
Correct. And finding people that want to do that job. Over-the-road trucking is always a difficult task, and I think finding the right people for that position has become more and more difficult.
An emotional issue, bills in the Capitol would deal with outlawing fetal tissue from elective abortions. Your position on those bills, have you studied them?
Correct. I don't have a ton of information on that. I'm definitely pro-life, so I would not support any elective abortion. But I also have a sister who has cancer, so I understand the research portion. So I think that's something I would have to look at as those bills would come to the floor and really understand how that process would work.
On your campaign Facebook website, you'd like to work with law enforcement officials to control the spread of crime and the magnified heroin situation. I assume that's a reference both to heroin and the opioid addiction.
Absolutely.
How would you fight those problems, sir?
I think the biggest thing it's starting has been education to our young kids. As I said, I have 3 young sons that are teenagers, and it starts at home with that education piece. But I also think it's important to look at moving forward with doctors and some of those people, how they're educated on prescribing those medications, and then also proper disposal or containing those once the unused portion is done. I think that is somewhat of a problem, and being in the business that I'm in, there are significant solutions that are coming down the road where manufacturers are taking back opioids, and there are some return projects that are going to, I think, help going down the road.
One of the issues that travels with this, whether correctly or not, is the issue of legalizing medical marijuana. Do you have a position on that?
I would probably not stand for legalizing marijuana at this point, even medical marijuana. Once again, I haven't done a lot of research on that. I would have to actually see the bill that was proposed before anything would be, but at this point, no. I would probably.
3 Republican members of the Assembly are sponsoring a bill that would lower the drinking age to 19 if we don't lose $53 million in federal highway dollars. You have 3 teenage sons?
Absolutely.
That's
yes.
a relevant issue.
Yes, it is.
How do you feel about that?
I see the relevancy of the bill. I think it would have to look, right now 21 seems to be working fairly well, in my opinion. Once again, I don't have all the statistics as far as what 19 would do to drinking age and deaths and things of that nature. So I don't know at this point I would support it. But if someone would provide me some other statistics, or as I become more involved and actually know the data, that's where I would probably make my decision.
A question on higher ed. The Board of Regents just approved merging the 2-year colleges into the 4 years. Is that something that, have you studied that issue at all?
I'm familiar with it a little bit. I don't understand all the circumstances that surround it. It's my understanding that the Board of Regents are the people that proposed that 2 years.
Yes.
So
President of the system.
correct.
Mr. Cross
yeah,
did.
Yes. So you have to trust some of the people you have in leadership at that point, and then for me it would be looking at what his proposals are and how it would affect the 2- and 4-year schools before I could make a decision.
One more question on K-12 schools.
Sure.
Do you support any limits on the choice program, the voucher program?
So my kids actually attended a Catholic grade school, And I think the choice program is valid for many people. If it works in your family, I think they should be allowed to do it, absolutely.
Okay. Should there be any income limits on who can get choice dollars?
Once again, don't have the figures to really justify what that amount would be or how it would affect the choice program. So I guess once I have more information on it to make that determination.
Okay, I want to give you a chance to talk about any other issues that I haven't raised that's important to your campaign.
No, biggest thing is our community here in the 58th. I just want to continue that strong leadership. Like I said, we've had a good group of leaders go to the Assembly and in the Senate, Glenn Grothman, Pat Strakota, and Bob Gannon, so hopefully I can continue that going forward.
Do you want to talk about why you're more qualified than the other 3 Republicans on the December 19th primary ballot?
Absolutely. I feel I'm more qualified because of my business experience. I'm not a politician. My small business experience would allow me to take the things that I've learned through that. I've paid taxes, I've paid payroll, and hopefully keep our government pointed in the right fiscal direction. And the second thing would be my connection to the community. I have a ton of connections with youth sports, church organizations, nonprofit organizations in the district, both in Slinger, West Bend, and the other communities. So my tie to the community, I think, relates well to take the issues that people have back to Madison and hopefully address them there.
Now, you worked on Jeff Fitzgerald's campaign, but
I did.
he was a candidate and you were a helper.
Yes.
What have you learned now that it's going to be your name on the ballot? Is it much different?
It's much different. I have learned that you have to listen more than anything. I think that's the best advice that I've gotten as I've gone through the campaign process. Listen first, and there are going to be times when you meet people and you're going to agree to disagree. There's absolutely no doubt. But that's fine. That's why we're here, and I don't mind the discussion one bit. It's been very enjoyable, to tell you the truth.
Thank you. Steve Stanek of West Bend is one of 4 Republicans on the December 19th primary ballot in the 58th Assembly District. Mr. Stanek, thanks for talking to WisconsinEye.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.